Everyone knows the story of how Rome fell. It's a tale etched into the bedrock of Western history, a cautionary saga of hubris, barbarians at the gates, and an empire crumbling into dust. But the popular version of the story, the one we all learn in school, often misses the most critical lesson. Great empires don't collapse overnight from a single, decisive blow. They don't just vanish in a dramatic flurry of fire and conquest. Instead, they rot from within, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until the magnificent structure can no longer support its own weight. The process is a quiet decay, a slow hollowing out of the foundations that once made them seem invincible. And as we look back at the patterns that preceded Rome's decline, a chilling sense of familiarity begins to emerge. The same arrogance, the same economic fallacies, and the same strategic blunders that doomed the Romans are echoing with startling clarity in the trajectory of another global superpower, the United States. It's a parallel that is too significant to ignore, a historical mirror reflecting a future we may be unknowingly steering ourselves toward. In its golden age, Rome was the center of the known world, an empire so vast and powerful that its citizens believed it was eternal. The idea that Rome could ever truly fall was simply unthinkable. Its military was unmatched, a disciplined and technologically superior force that had conquered continents and secured the longest period of peace its territories had ever known, the Pax Romana. Its trade network spanned from the misty shores of Britain to the spice markets of India, bringing unprecedented wealth and exotic goods into the heart of the empire. Roman engineering was a marvel, with aqueducts, roads, and cities built to last for millennia, many of which still stand today. For the average Roman citizen living in the capital, the empire was not just a political entity. It was the natural order of the world. It was permanent, infallible, and destined to last forever. This deep-seated belief in its own invincibility created a profound sense of security, a collective confidence that bordered on arrogance. Today, a similar sentiment pervades American consciousness. The belief that America is simply too big to fail, too militarily dominant, and too economically essential to the global system to ever truly collapse, is a cornerstone of the modern national identity. Like the Romans before us, we see our global influence, our technological supremacy, and our cultural reach not as a temporary phase of history, but as a permanent state of being. It is this very sense of exceptionalism, this unwavering faith in our own permanence, that makes us blind to the subtle, internal cracks that are beginning to form. The first, and perhaps most insidious mechanism of Rome's internal decay was the debasement of its currency. For centuries, the Roman denarius was the world's reserve currency, a coin of nearly pure silver trusted and accepted in every corner of the known world. Its value was stable, its integrity unquestioned. Merchants from distant lands would accept the denarius without hesitation because they knew it contained a reliable weight of precious metal. But as the empire grew, so did its expenses. A sprawling bureaucracy, an ever-expanding welfare state providing free grain and entertainment to the populace, and, most critically, endless, costly wars on its frontiers began to strain the imperial treasury to its breaking point. The emperors, faced with expenses that far outstripped their tax revenues, were trapped. They couldn't raise taxes much further without sparking rebellion, nor could they simply stop funding the military or the popular dole. So they turned to a subtle, deceptive solution. They started to dilute the currency. Slowly at first, and then with increasing desperation, they began mixing the silver in the denarius with cheaper base metals like copper and tin. Each new coin looked the same, but it contained less and less actual silver. For a time, the deception worked. The government could mint more coins from the same amount of silver, allowing it to pay its soldiers and fund its programs. But the market is never fooled for long. As the public gradually realized that their money was becoming worthless, trust in the denarius evaporated. To compensate for the lower silver content, merchants began demanding more coins for the same goods and services. Prices exploded across the empire, leading to rampant, uncontrollable inflation. A soldier's pay, once enough to support a family, could barely buy a loaf of bread. The economic chaos that ensued crippled trade, destroyed savings, and shattered the social contract between the state and its people. This ancient story finds a powerful echo in modern American monetary policy. In 1971, President Nixon severed the final link between the U.S. dollar and gold, transforming the world's reserve currency into a purely fiat system backed by nothing more than the full faith and credit of the United States. Just as Roman emperors began diluting their silver, modern central banks, led by the Federal Reserve, have engaged in unprecedented levels of money printing, a practice now politely termed quantitative easing. Each new dollar created out of thin air dilutes the value of every other dollar in existence. The resulting inflation we experience today, the rising cost of groceries, fuel, and housing, is not a new or mysterious phenomenon. It is the modern manifestation of currency debasement, the same destructive force that hollowed out the Roman economy 2,000 years ago. The technology has changed from minting presses to digital ledgers, but the principle remains identical. The second critical factor in Rome's decline was its military overextension. The Roman legions, the most effective fighting force of the ancient world, were stretched dangerously thin, tasked with defending a border that snaked for thousands of miles across 3 continents. From the cold forests of Germania to the scorching deserts of Mesopotamia, Roman soldiers stood guard in a vast network of forts and garrisons. Maintaining this enormous military apparatus became an unsustainable burden. Historical estimates suggest that at its peak, Rome spent as much as half of its entire budget simply on defense, a figure that bled the state of resources needed for infrastructure, administration, and internal stability. The very empire the legions were meant to protect was being bankrupted by the cost of its own defense. As the empire expanded, its strategic position paradoxically weakened. Each new territory annexed created a new, longer border to defend, demanding more soldiers, more supplies, and more money. The empire became a victim of its own success, spread so wide that its core began to weaken. Today, the United States finds itself in a strikingly similar position. America's defense budget is colossal, exceeding the combined military spending of the next 10 nations. A global network of approximately 750 military bases in over 80 countries serves as the modern equivalent of Rome's provincial garrisons. This immense military footprint is intended to project power and maintain global stability, but it comes at an extraordinary cost, both financially and strategically. The endless cycle of foreign interventions, nation building, and policing the world's oceans drains the national treasury and diverts focus from pressing domestic issues. Just like in ancient Rome, the projection of power slowly transforms from a source of strength into a crippling burden. The ability to fight anywhere on the globe at a moment's notice seems like the ultimate expression of power, but it creates a strategic fragility where resources are perpetually spread thin, and the nation is committed to defending interests far from its own shores. There comes a point in the life of every empire when the cost of defending its vast periphery becomes greater than the value that periphery provides. It's a fatal tipping point where the complex machinery of imperial control begins to consume itself. Rome reached that point when its tax revenues could no longer support the legions required to hold its borders, and its debased currency could no longer fund its obligations. The empire had become too expensive to exist. America, with its spiraling national debt, its unfunded liabilities, and the immense, ever-growing cost of its global military posture, is now rapidly approaching that same precipice. The next stage in this historical pattern is not necessarily a dramatic invasion from an external enemy. Before the barbarians ever sacked the city of Rome, the real damage had already been done. The next stage is internal decay, the slow, grinding collapse of economic stability, social cohesion, and political trust. While currency debasement and military overreach were hollowing out the Roman Empire's foundations, a third, more insidious mechanism was at work, not on the frontiers or in the treasury, but in the minds of the Roman people themselves. This was the age of panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The Roman government discovered a potent formula for social control: keep the populace fed and entertained, and they would scarcely notice the erosion of their freedoms or the decay of their state. Citizens who once valued their republican duties and civic participation began to trade them for handouts and spectacle. Free grain distributions ensured no one starved, while the grandiosity of the Colosseum and the Circus Maximus offered a thrilling escape from the grim realities of a faltering economy and a corrupt political system. The roars of the crowd, the clash of gladiators, the thunder of chariot races, these were not mere entertainment. They were instruments of state policy, a mass sedative designed to divert attention from the real issues. As the empire's coffers dwindled and its borders weakened, the spectacles grew ever more elaborate. The games became a substitute for genuine political engagement, a way for emperors to purchase popularity without addressing the structural rot spreading through the empire. The citizens, in turn, became passive consumers of state-sponsored distraction. Their focus shifted from the Senate floor to the arena floor, from debates about law and governance to bets on the next victor. Complacency became the new civic virtue, and the clamor for entertainment drowned out the quiet crumbling of institutions. Today, we see a disturbingly similar pattern, albeit in a far more advanced and pervasive form. The Colosseum has been replaced by the infinite scroll, the chariot races by the 24/7 news cycle, and viral social media trends. Our modern bread and circuses are not dispensed from public granaries, but streamed directly into our homes and onto the devices in our hands. The bread takes the form of economic stimulus, temporary financial reliefs that patch over deep-seated economic frailties without resolving them. It's the promise of comfort and consumption, a modern-day dole that keeps the system running just smoothly enough to prevent widespread unrest. The circuses, however, are where the parallels become most striking. We are immersed in a digital ecosystem engineered for maximum distraction. Social media algorithms, streaming services, celebrity culture, and hyper-partisan outrage create a constant barrage of dopamine-driven stimuli. This digital coliseum demands our attention, fragments our focus, and encourages passive consumption over active participation. We become spectators in our own lives and in the life of our nation, scrolling through curated realities while the real-world architecture of our society, our economy, our infrastructure, our political system shows increasing signs of strain. The goal of this modern machine is the same as the ancient one, to trade meaningful civic awareness for fleeting, superficial engagement. Ignorance becomes a byproduct of entertainment, and distraction becomes the default state of the citizenry. The more we look at our screens, the less we look at the world around us. These three mechanisms, currency debasement, military overreach, and bread and circuses, did not operate in isolation. They formed a devastating feedback loop, a destructive synergy that accelerated Rome's internal decay. The debasement of the currency, the slow poisoning of the empire's economic bloodstream, made everything more expensive and less stable. It eroded savings, destroyed trust, and fueled social unrest. To fund its ever-expanding military and quell internal dissent, the state needed more money, which led to further debasement. This cycle created the very economic anxieties that the bread and circuses were designed to soothe. Simultaneously, the immense cost of maintaining a global military presence drained the treasury of the wealth it desperately needed to maintain infrastructure and provide essential services at home. As bridges crumbled and aqueducts fell into disrepair, the state funneled its remaining resources not into rebuilding, but into larger armies and grander games. The military overreach created the insecurity and financial strain. While the bread and circuses numbed the population to the consequences, it was a vicious triangle of decline. One mechanism created a problem, the second exacerbated it, and the third concealed it from public view. Together, they hollowed out the Roman Empire from within, leaving behind a fragile shell that appeared mighty on the outside, but was rotten to the core. The strength, resilience, and civic virtue that had defined the Republic were systematically dismantled, not by a foreign enemy, but by the very policies enacted to preserve the illusion of stability. Yet, perhaps the most powerful force enabling this collapse was a psychological one: denial. Right up until the final sack of Rome, the vast majority of its citizens held an unshakable belief in their own exceptionalism. They were Romans, heirs to a glorious and eternal empire. The idea that their world could fundamentally unravel was not just improbable. It was unthinkable. They saw the crises, the inflation, the endless wars, the political corruption as temporary setbacks, challenges to be overcome, not as symptoms of a terminal illness. Their identity was so intertwined with the idea of Roman permanence that they were psychologically incapable of confronting the evidence of its decline. They dismissed the warnings of historians and the laments of critics as needless pessimism. The empire had always endured, and so it always would. This same chorus of denial echoes in the modern West, and particularly in America, today. It can't happen here. The phrase is a cornerstone of our modern civic religion. We believe our institutions are stronger, our technology is more advanced, and our system is more resilient than any that has come before. We see ourselves as the exception to the rule of history. But history does not make exceptions. It is an unforgiving accountant that responds not to national pride or confident pronouncements, but to mathematics and human behavior. It measures the debasement of currency, the cost of imperial overstretch, and the erosion of civic engagement. Confidence is not a defense against systemic decay. In fact, it can be an accelerant, as it prevents a society from taking the necessary, often painful steps to correct its course before it's too late. The belief that one is immune to collapse is often the final symptom before it begins. The parallels are not just historical curiosities. They are unfolding in real time. The US dollar, the bedrock of the global financial system for nearly a century, is facing an unprecedented challenge to its dominance. As nations around the world actively seek alternatives, diversifying their reserves and building new trade alliances, the trust that underpins the dollar's value is slowly but surely eroding. This is the modern equivalent of Rome's silver denarius being diluted with base metals, a slow, creeping loss of faith that, once it reaches a tipping point, can trigger a rapid and catastrophic repricing of value. We are witnessing the early stages of a global shift away from the very financial system that has powered American prosperity and influence. Meanwhile, our military expenditures continue to climb to astronomical levels, defending a global footprint that mirrors Rome's sprawling frontiers. We spend more on our military than the next 10 countries combined, yet here at home, our infrastructure is rated a C by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Roads crumble, bridges age past their breaking points, and our electrical grid becomes more fragile. We are, in essence, policing the world while our own house falls into disrepair. Just as Rome's wealth was drained to fund legions on distant borders, America's resources are being funneled into a global military apparatus while domestic needs are deferred. At the same time, our citizenry is increasingly fragmented and distracted by the digital noise of our modern circuses, more likely to be engaged in a trivial online dispute than a serious debate about fiscal responsibility or national priorities. The core foundations of the empire, trust in its currency, productive capacity at home, and the unified focus of its people are all silently eroding. This brings us to a final philosophical reflection. The collapse of an empire is rarely a single dramatic event like an earthquake. It is a process, a slow, grinding decline that can span generations. It's like a chronic illness, not a sudden heart attack. The symptoms appear gradually, a little more inflation here, another costly foreign intervention there, a bit more public distraction and apathy. For those living through it, it often doesn't feel like a collapse at all. It just feels like life. The day-to-day changes are too small to register as part of a larger, more ominous pattern. This is why you cannot simply stop a collapse once the underlying forces are in motion. The momentum is too great, the system too complex. But you don't have to be a passive victim of the process. While you may not be able to stop the river from flowing, you can learn to navigate its currents. You can prepare. This preparation isn't about building a bunker and hoarding supplies. It's about shifting your mindset. It's about focusing on what is real and durable in a world of illusion and decay. It means building wealth in real assets, things that have intrinsic value, independent of a government's fiscal discipline. It means cultivating real skills, practical abilities that are in demand regardless of the economic climate. And most importantly, it means developing real awareness, the ability to see the world as it is, not as you're told it is, and to understand the historical patterns that are once again playing out. Rome didn't fall when the barbarians sacked the city. It fell when its people stopped believing in the virtues and responsibilities that had made it great. It fell when comfort became more important than freedom, when distraction replaced duty, and when the belief in its own eternity blinded it to the reality of its decay. America's greatest challenge today is not a foreign adversary or an economic rival. It is the blindness within the refusal to see the parallels, to learn from history, and to confront the uncomfortable truths about the path we are on. The story of our time is not yet over, but the ending will be written by those who are paying attention. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of our discussion. Your support helps us continue to explore these crucial topics. We'll see you in the next video.